In any life, we have highs and lows, light and dark, wins and losses. What happens when we encounter that moment in time when what happens next could change everything? Join us as we step into another person's inspirational moment and see how we can connect their experience to ours. This is Greg Stevens, and you're listening to A Shot of Inspiration. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. I'm Greg Stevens, and my guest this week is someone I've gotten to know really quickly on LinkedIn. We connected, and when we started talking, there was just a nice connection, and I've learned so much from him over the 2 or 3 times we've talked so far. And he's an exciting person. He's a chief marketing officer for a lot of different companies that have come up in Silicon Valley. And I wanted to have Greg on. His name is Greg Ness. Wanted to have Greg on and just talk about his experience with startups. And a lot of you out there are startups, and you'll have a lot of hopes and dreams, but there's a lot of obstacles along the way. And I want Greg to share some of the obstacles he faced and also glean some insight to things that may help you in the business world or even in life. If you're not an entrepreneur, maybe something that can help you promote yourself within your own business or your own career. So, Greg, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, great to be here, Greg.
Great. Thanks. What I'd like you to share with the listeners a little about your background, where you came from, how you came up through the ranks. And then I'm just going to let it follow organically and ask you some questions that I've learned along the way.
Sounds good. So for the last 25 years, been a CMO type marketing area for startups. Last 5 years for several at a time, because ultimately, after doing 10 of them, it got to a point where one of my CEOs just said, Greg, you could do 2 or 3 of these at once and nobody'd ever know. And I thought about it, and then I started and then didn't go back, work from home, but then travel out to the startup. 20 years of the normal traditional startup marketing role with software, hardware, data center, security, cloud, multiple different areas. And before that, I worked for a very large service provider company for about 10 years. So I went from like a big company and another startup right before that, and then dived into Silicon Valley for the 20 and just had an incredible experience, met a lot of people, worked from people all over the world, multiple cultures, multiple backgrounds. I was a generalist. If you look on LinkedIn, you'll see my master's was in Middle Eastern Studies, economic history. It's my background. Took Arabic for 3 years. I don't speak it. Well, I took it for 4 and I didn't learn 3 years worth. It was a very difficult language for me. College in Portland, Oregon, grad school, Texas. And one other kind of unique thing, born in San Francisco, but lived my first 3, 4 years and traveled around the world 5 or 6 times by the time I was 4 years old. So I think that's the story. I'm sticking to it.
What a great kickoff with 3 and 4 years old, all the places you traveled. That's great. So you left Texas, went back to Oregon, it sounds correct. And then
I went to Washington State, did some company in Seattle area, and then got a job opportunity in the Bay Area. And I was just so excited about this. Is the late 1990s. And I had been reading all of the different magazines about what was going on, and I was hooked. So when I got a job offer there, I was, got to do this.
Yeah. I love the San Francisco area. It's one of the prettiest areas in the country, I think. And I really enjoyed it. So what was it like getting into Silicon Valley in that area during that time? Because there's special times in business or, I think it's funny. San Francisco in the 60s would have been something I would have been interested in. But in business in Silicon Valley, mid 90s through probably 2015. What was it like? What did you run into? Or some obstacles? What were some successes you had?
Well, it was crazy, stressful, and you have to learn to manage it. And I did okay at that. Beautiful area, meeting with a lot of interesting people. But I would just say the late 1990s, I just call it a little bit crazy because you have a lot of companies that become very famous for making a lot of money. And then there's a whole lot of companies that aren't doing jack squat. And not knowing ahead of time which ones are going to be more successful than the others. And that kind of dynamic. And then the fact that in that world, working in marketing for more than 2 to 3 years at an exec level in these companies is highly unusual. So I went from 10 years at a large company where I could have done the job. And I'm not insulting anybody. I'm just telling you the way it was for me. I could do the job in 2 to 3 days a week and have a lot of friends, and then to Silicon Valley. And I didn't know enough about telephony, about security, about any of this area. So I moved into this little hotel in San Mateo and had an inflatable bed, and because it was very expensive. And I had stacks, probably 30 to 50 different tech magazines that I was reading like compulsively to get myself educated, because for then I was on the consumer side for 10 years, mostly consumer, some business to business, and flipping to that and to the enterprise business and all of the questions. And I was doing PR and analysis, working with analysts in different specialty areas, and put a big demand on me to learn stuff because the Middle East really didn't turn into much value there. My Arabic didn't help me much. So all of that, I just spent the first 3 or 4 years being obsessive about reading and learning as much as I could. And then on top of that, the craziness and the startup bill.
Right.
From a 3 month, it's not even on my LinkedIn profile, where I got in, got the job, was very excited. Then the VCs were trying to get the company to spend way too much money. And on their agency that they owned, they had invested in this company. And I just refused because it was going to kill the company. And I got fired that day after hiring 2 people I'd worked with a previous company and no notice at all.
Yeah.
And then about 3 months later, a recruiter calls me from this company. Oops. We spent the money, Greg. You were right. And I was like, would you consider coming back after that? And I just said, you got about cash enough, as I remember, for about 6 months. And I don't think you're going to get another fund based on what you guys did. I think it's over. I'm just going to be honest. And it was over for them. So that was one of the really hard ones. It was at a beautiful office, downtown San Francisco. I was really excited. And then 90 days later, boom, you're done. And I'm going, what the heck, kids? Wife that's helping with the kids. And then I just got down there. So it was a little crazy.
Yeah. It sounds also, you were right about the situation.
Yeah.
That had to be really frustrating to know that in the end, I was right and I got let go. So it probably set you on a faster path to the next thing than you probably would have had you stuck around.
It did. And executives I worked with later for what I did and heard about it really helped my career a lot.
Yeah.
It definitely was. But it was a crazy time down there where the VCs, everybody knew that if you came in first, you can be a multi-billion-dollar company.
Right.
Come in number 2, worth 100 million or maybe a little less. And then, once you get down to the 3rd, 4th, 5th, it starts getting to be where, are you going to have a furniture sale when you close the company? That's kind of the dynamic. And so they put a lot of pressure on, a lot of spending, and a lot of long hours and working 6, 7 days a week, because the value to come in number 1 or number 2, and it's probably a lot like professional sports and everything else type of thing. So it's not like that unique. But at the same time, it was a shift from working in a large company. And I was doing sports marketing, having fun, meeting all these different athletes and traveling. And the pay wasn't very good, but it was a lot of perks. And it was a very fun job. To the other side, which was fairly crazy.
Well, and there's nothing like probably having to go home in that rat race and say, honey, I got fired today. And what are we going to do with the kids? We just moved out here. That had to be brutal.
It was. And, when you got family involved in all of that dynamics, and not that we had saved a lot or anything like that. And so we were exposed, but I got very lucky. And because in the times I had downside issues, because for whatever reason, something good came out of it. And so it made it a lot easier. So despite, and again, on my LinkedIn, every 2 years, there was 1 4-year, but all these flips, some surprises, all that, never got $1 of unemployment from it. I got companies that stood up really quickly. And it was those days. Today's a lot different now. And people may spend more time looking. But in those days, there were so many funded companies and startups that you would typically get 3 or 4 companies a month wanting to recruit you. for at least through mid 2000s, maybe 2008 area was
Right.
crazy like that. There were so many people. There was a shortage of people that knew what they were doing in marketing, in product, in tech, and all that. If you were in a different city and you didn't know that many people, you could easily look for 2, 3 months for a job. Here, it wasn't that hard on that side.
Right. Right. So from the VC and entrepreneurial side of things, what do you see it doing now from your perspective? Because you go out and you work with these groups and you do marketing and try to build them up. What are some of the different challenges you were having, say, in early 2000, 2005?
Well, a lot of the consulting work that I've done last 5 years has been outside of Silicon Valley. Same dynamic where you get a city, whether it's Seattle or Miami or Pittsburgh or just throwing those out. There's a shortage of people that have done startups and the dynamic is fundamentally different. Some people learn that the hard way. Others people have heard about that, right? And go the other direction. And so I would just say that the dynamic was such that the kind of things that were very influential and powerful in early 2000 to 2010 in Silicon Valley are quite different. Whereas with startups before, a lot of it was cold calling, having a great PowerPoint slide and getting out and pounding and emailing and all of that. I would say now, number one, there's more startups springing outside of Silicon Valley than in, at least from what my perspective is. Number two is credibility has become so much more important because there's a lot of choices. There's a lot of different things. And there's been enough experience that executives have had over the last 20 years that there can be surprises with startups where the product doesn't quite work as what it says, bring it in, or it's bought by a lot of science project types at the companies versus a real customer. And there's the dynamics that where awareness and design and your look, outreach, and your traffic to your website was a little more important in those days versus now are there people who are real opportunities for your company and finding them? It's just a different dynamic where I would say 8 years ago, we'd be looking at the website, how many clicks on this, how many clicks on this, how many this, how many cold calls, what's the conversion rate, and things like that. That's still kind of important. But my clients for the last 5 years, we focus more on getting credibility with third parties about the startup versus the executive being really smart and sharing his or her information about how they know all this stuff. And nobody really cares anymore about startups per se. What they're looking for is stuff that's going to have a business impact, and credibility. And that matters a lot more than a beautiful website or a great design or, my God, that CEO's got great personality. It's a much different world now.
Yeah, that's a good question because I've seen a difference in leadership in the world. Do you think there's the leaders in startups and the CEOs that we're running into, would you say they're more or less than they were several years ago as far as intelligence around dealing with the matters that show up? What would you tell me about leadership? Yeah.
I think that companies today, and this might be part of it being outside of Silicon Valley, but when I hit in the late 1990s, it was all about hiring the youngest person you could get who's going to do the most stuff without thinking. That was the mindset.
Yeah.
And the companies weren't concerned at all about whether they're even going to be profitable in the next 5 or 10 years. You wanted to become number one and your name out there. And that was such a huge deal. And even then, because I had done 10 years at a large company, I was always a little bit like, this is a little crazy. This is not real. This is not going to last. And I was thinking that all the time.
Right.
Whereas a lot of the startups and the VCs, a few companies had popped and made a lot of money. Then there was money to be invested. And it wasn't really thinking about how fast, how profitable, how smart business. It was just get out there. And that was that 3-month company. That's what they were going to do. And they were going to run some ads and they spent millions that I was saying was a really dumb idea. And then I would say around 2008, it kind of drifted around. We had a financial issue, a big financial issue in the country. And so there was more, I would say there were more people that had been experienced from that first 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
And so people got a little wiser. And I think today, even more so. I think we just went from a period of the fastest, the most you could spend, and the youngest person you could get who's maybe hasn't even gone to college and put them in and have them do stuff and let's see what happens, to, you know what, this money may run out some point in time. We better do it smart. And so I would say the last 5 years, many of the companies I've become familiar with have become much more careful about it. And the only times that would change is they might go to a marketing meeting somewhere and run into someone that was from a big company. And the big company dynamic is fundamentally different. And they give them advice. And then they start doing that. And then suddenly they're running out of money. What happened? Wait, this worked at these big companies. And so there's this billionaire mindset where it was still a little bit of that 1990s, but the money was there.
Yeah.
And for a lot of startups, they're raising, the first round might be under 4 million. A lot of them are at 1 or 2, and they have to be very careful about what they're spending. So it's a different mindset when you've raised 1 million versus 4 or 10. And I mean, one of my startups, their first round was 50 million.
Yeah.
So a different mindset from that, and kind of things of what they do and why.
Yeah. And I like what you said. Also, some of these younger people who are out there failing early on, they got some experience under them. There's nothing like experience, is there?
Well, many of them left. They didn't want to come back to that.
Yeah.
And the funniest one was at this one startup. This was a marketing product director, very brilliant guy, prepared for this world. And during some difficulties, he said, you know what? I'm going to Oklahoma into real estate. That's my future. I'm done with this. I've had lots of those, but that's one that still stuck out. And he's listening. He knows who he is.
That's great. No, and probably made a killing on the real estate market recently.
I hope he did, because most startups, and this is the big surprise when Silicon Valley was on TV and everything, is that everybody's making money, but no, it's actually a certain percentage. And the bigger companies and the stocks, the Googles, the Apples, and those, a lot of them, did really well. But when you come over to the startups, pretty much 90% of them fail.
Yeah.
And then those top 10%, that's a small percent that get the big payoff. And then I had my share of really great companies and great things and made a little bit of money, enough to get a barbecue in the backyard after 2 years, and I had my shares of those and no regrets. They were fun, amazing people, some of the best CEOs I've ever worked with. But still, one time, Santa Clara University, I spoke to a bunch of the MBA students. I said, if you're in this for money, look for some other area, because this is not likelihood payoff. This is likelihood for risk and challenge dynamics versus that. And you just have to understand that going in. And they were like, what? Wait a second. I thought I was going to make millions here in the first 3 years, a small percentage.
Yeah. But a true entrepreneur hears that and goes, I'm in.
I want to challenge. I want to do something different. I want to change the world. And that's where I would say the people that stayed in for multiple companies, they wanted to work in very high challenge in that growth opportunity, the wisdom, that comes from that. I think those are the people that stayed in and did multiple. I don't know many that have done 10. I know a few of them, but not many. And they're really wonderful people that are friends, even if I've competed with them a couple of times. And we did I was a rugby player, so the little under the scrum dirtiness,
Right.
but we still became friends.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also with an entrepreneur, you're going to have the idea of autonomy to make all the shots. And it's just such a core value for an entrepreneur, because they see it a certain way. They want to be able to call that. Many times I find the problem with many entrepreneurs, me included, sometimes we don't ask for the help we need. That's why I encourage entrepreneurs, anyone. I think having a coach is important, having someone who can see those things, help guide, where you can bounce ideas off of, because as you know, it's so important at that level, because the higher you go up, you can vent those things.
I would say in general, again, and I'm stereotyping because I only work for 2 very large companies, and I got brought into a couple because of acquisitions. But in one particular memory was my last day when I was going back to Startupville, I saw 3 different senior executives who were reading the newspaper in their office as I was walking out. And this was a culture where people sat in long meetings, and you couldn't even get a conference room in the company because people were meeting all the time. And they're generally 5 to 7 people, and they were trying to come up with reasons not to do things. And then when I went to Startupville, most execs hated meetings. And they're like, if there's more than 3 people in this meeting, I'm coming in here and I'm going to start rocking some people. And it was like, I want decisions. I want risk to be done. I don't want people sitting and talking about it forever. And some of them even had socks to say, I hate meetings. And it was on their socks even. So a lot of personalities.
Yeah. But it's interesting when you really think about it, the most effective probably do a bit of both.
Yeah.
Because I need to plan out something, but I don't need to spend my whole day planning out. Let's look at it. But the other thing is many groups, they don't want the mistakes. They don't want the larger companies because it is so costly for them. And a smaller company can make adjustments much quicker as well.
Yeah. And the VCs meetings were usually every 3 months, and those would go on for 3-hour meetings. Those were those. And then when you're out fundraising, those meetings and everything going back and stuff, and going up and down Silicon Valley was a wonderful, memorable experience with a lot of different brilliant and some very ego and personality people. A lot of memories.
Yeah. Give me one of the most difficult and also a different story about one of the most pleasurable things about being with a startup, because I'm sure you've got a whole myriad of stories that you could come up with. But what would be some of the more difficult and then more pleasurable? Anything there?
One of the most difficult is that we had a family issue and we lost one of our kids in an accident. And I'd come back from the funeral and I was working at the office, as deeply emotional as anyone can imagine. And then an exec comes into my office knowing what I'd been through and asking for his girlfriend to get a raise and a promotion, who reported to me. And it was very difficult, and thinking to myself, but having what I'd been through, I knew what to do. And it was going to be about integrity. And even though we were getting ready to go IPO and a lot of money was at stake, and if I had just agreed, I would have made a lot more money. And by that, mean I'd have money more. And I said to me, I was so focused. And I just basically told them to buzz off and that, not going to happen. And because it was pre the IPO, and this was a senior executive, is very important. And this person's not, I would call evil. I would just say this person had their interest and they were enough that felt like here's an opportunity to get something. Many people would never have done that. It's a highly competitive world in Silicon Valley. And there's a lot of, hey, if I got an angle, things like that. And so I ended up leaving 3 months later, going to another company and then watched the IPO and things like that. And so that was really difficult for a number of reasons. And I had gone home and I was trying to mow our front yard. I bought a mow pusher just to mow and exercise. And after this, and the mower broke, and I couldn't even freaking mow the yard. So I'd gone this, I lost a daughter. I then lost my job and a lot of money, all in a short period of time. And I just looked up to the sky and just said, what did I do in this life for a previous one to set this up for me? And basically the message is you ask for wisdom and this is how you get it. And so that was a very difficult problem, that kind of thing. It was also a very big growth experience. It's really easy in Silicon Valley to get caught up in this material world and the money and everything, and the competitiveness and the amount of ego-ness that plays in that market and that type of thing. And so that was my way of putting things in a lot more perspective. When you have no control, you have to just accept what things have. So I would say was one of the toughest times in my life.
Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
And thank you for sharing that, and my complete condolences and sorrow for that. This may be a little too personal, but are you still married?
Yeah.
That, to me, that's amazing because I've had friends who have lost children, and usually I think the chances are less than 7% that the couple stays together after a loss of a child. Could you share how you believe you made it through that? Because maybe there's someone out there listening that just needs to hear what you have to say around it.
When Teresa and I met, I know exactly where we were. We had played softball together like months before, and we were both married then. And we had both gone through a divorce when we met. This was before, our daughter died. And we had dinner, ended up sitting next to each other, and we chatted till the restaurant closed. And there were like 12 other people with us, and they had all gone. And we had just had this great conversation. And at that point in time, when she and I met, I had felt intuitively that we would get married. That's never happened to me in that kind of a thing. And 3 or 4 months later, we hadn't seen each other since it because she lived in Los Angeles area and I was up in Seattle. And then I had a dream about her and I having our oldest son, before we even, and then out of the blue, she called me and she had finally finished all her stuff with her. I was just waiting until things got official and legit versus what some people don't do. And it was just the proper thing to do. And then when she got her paperwork, all that and everything was official, then we became friends. And then she would come up to there, I'd go down there. And we just hit it off. It was a chemistry that's amazing. And then when about 2 years ago, I had a big health issue and I had an aorta dissection, and that's a serious thing. It's a survival dynamic. And then she shows up helping, and it's been amazing bunch of coincidences that helped me through it. And marrying wise to somebody who sticks with you through craziness.
Yeah.
But it was never in our relationship a question. Never was. And we've had our arguments, and everybody does.
Absolutely.
Right? You have to learn how to cooperate and make deals and type of thing. And if you do that, you're going to have a much happier marriage. And if you keep thinking, how can I work things out to benefit me? That's a nice way to drive the opposite.
Right.
How can you help your wife, your children, your family members, your friends? You think about that early on, I think leads to, we've been married 26 years here this year coming around. So
that's congratulations. That's beautiful. It's interesting because you brought up, and I just found this out, folks. When I met Greg, he didn't even tell me about it, but later he told me about a book he'd written. So I ordered it. I still haven't read it yet, but it's here, and it's Antioch, and it's Greg Ness. And it's interesting because before we got on here, you're talking about having a dream, and you're talking, so now it's interesting. It seems to me that you're probably one of those people that can remember their dreams, has deep, insightful dreams that lead you in a certain way, because it sounds like it led you to an engagement with your wife at one level. Before we got on here today, you were just talking about the dream you went through and how it laid out this idea for this book for you. You want to share about that?
Sure. So I was working on a photo shoot at Santa Clara University for a case study for Redline Networks and with the CIO. And it was an amazing day and felt great. And I was already super jazzed about what was going to happen with Redline. And we got bought. The company went from 400,000 a quarter to about, I want to say 4 million a quarter in 2 years, which is unusual growth and high, and stuff like that. The case studies were an important part of it. We're doing the photo shoot that day, and I just felt really good, exhilarated and stuff, went home, all that. And I'm like, oh, this is going to work so well. It's going to be great for the company and us. And then that particular night, and this is like late summer, early fall 2003, I had this dream set back in ancient Rome. And I was in a battle, fought, and I got wounded, and I was being carried off. I was this young person among older Roman guys, Roman officers, and they're cheering me for being in a battle I shouldn't have been in at the time, got wounded fighting. And that was the first one. And I just thought, wow, that was an amazing story. Wow, that was powerful. That was very different than being in your underwear in your college class and waking up like, oh my God, I didn't do my homework. It was a lot different than those. And it was wow. And I kind of kept it to myself, but then I started getting them once or twice a month, and more violent, more very emotional type ones, and having conversations in the dreams and stuff like that. And this was not any type of drugs I was taking. And then I would wake up and I would be in tears at 3 a.m. And then my wife is like wondering what the hell's going on. And I'm like, I just watched a whole bunch of people be crucified and things like that. So you can kind of guess when the time period was. And then over a period of time, more and more details. names of people and places, and all this stuff started filling in. And so Teresa was hearing about this all the time, my wife, because I'm getting it out, right?
Yeah.
But it's not something I'm necessarily talking to at the office. Then one dinner around 2005 or six. So this has been going on for 3 or 4 years, of one or twice a month, maybe a little bit more than that. Very powerful, often brutal, which is why my books have a lot of violence in them and sex, and all that, because those dreams were there. And I'm having dinner with a guy who had gone to the little party in Nevada where you get the crazy people and the experiences. And he had taken some drugs and he was openly talking about it. He was a capitalist and a startup guy and a friend of mine. And so then I opened up and I said, I want to share with you maybe a dozen dreams. And because his wife is a psychiatrist, so I said, I want to get your perspective on this because this has been going on and it's interfering with my sleep. And she just goes, this is called, and starts telling me about it. No, this is not the normal dream. This is this and this. And I'm just go, what? What's all this about? She gave me books to read and all this. And I go, and she goes, well, what do you want to do about it? And I go, I want to go to sleep through the night. I'm into sleep. I want to, all that kind of stuff. And she goes, well, there's two things. Number one, you need to do this certain kind of psychiatric 3-hour session, regression analysis or regression type thing.
Right.
So I found somebody and did that. And then she goes, the other thing is if you start writing it down, you start writing down your ancient Rome thing going on. And so I started taking notes and stuff like that. And then I got caught up in it. I thought, you know what? I think this could be turned into a book. Now, it's a book that's quite different from these great top selling books because I have a lot of details about these things because I'm talking to myself about the dream. And it's like I'm taking a, what do I say? A coat that's inside, one by thread, and then putting it back together again from inside your mind. What does it look like? Where was this? And all of these things. And so once I started that, my dreams got better and better. There was less. I saw a lot of bloodshed and violent stuff, a lot. And things that were for me in 2004, 5, 6, in that area, I wasn't really prepared for. And in the middle of the night and feel like it's deeply personal was very difficult. So then once the books came out, every now and then, and very often I'll have an ancient Rome thing, but it's some guiltiness from a particular person in ancient history who did a lot of great things, but then had deep guilt over like wiping out a certain civilization, Northern Spain. That's a book coming up in book 3. And I try to look online and read historians of ancient Rome to find out more details. And the problem is that most of the stuff written about then was written 200 years later by 3 or 4 historians that come from different parties within Rome who are arguing over who should be the next emperors.
Right.
So it's not clearly the kind of history that if we were talking about like the Civil War or Vietnam, we have a lot more data. We have a lot more things that we could get on. We just didn't have it. So anyway, hope that answered your question.
That's amazing because I think about that. I don't have dreams like that. I don't have nightmares. I don't have any, there's really no violence. If there's something, I can't get the cab over to where I need to go. That's about as much as my dreams come out. I've never had anything like that. So, but they have subsided
They went away. So I haven't had one for easily 3 or 4 years. And even then after the books came out, they got milder and a little more bizarre and more of the kind of traditional, like dreams that you'll have normally versus the brutal, very specific, what Julius Caesar, what he actually looked like. And when I've seen pictures, I'm like, okay, that one's been dressed up to make him look better. He's actually bald. He's got this and this and all, and so it's hilarious because I have these funny ideas and I have nowhere where it's from. Right. Reincarnation is an option, but there's a whole lot going on and it could be just the universe and how we're connected. Who knows?
Yeah.
Our genetics, you never know.
There's a clarity there for you. It sounds like
it sort of is.
Yeah.
And when I did I'll share you one of the strange ones was a dream that taking this little fish. And then when I looked it up and it actually existed and it was a drug that was taken in those days, that really freaked me out. And I took this little fish. I mean, it's in my book, right? I had a dream to go back in time, further back from ancient Greece. In my dream, I'm now back in ancient Greece at a different situation and all this going on from taking this psychedelic drug that they were taking in ancient Rome. And 5 or 10 years ago, someone was reviewing my book and they were a historian and they slammed it like, this is complete bogus. There was nothing about taking psychedelics in ancient Rome times. About 4 years ago, a book came out that in ancient Egypt and Greece and Rome, psychedelics were taken and all this. And then I found that fish. It's in my book. You look it up online and go, oh my God, psychedelic to ancient Roman times. That was a weird thing because this has something, you're having a dream and you're in Silicon Valley and you're working on software, hardware, and then you dream about some fish in ancient Rome. The likelihood of all of this, and then to find out that there actually was one.
Yeah.
And it was the fish symbol that was on it that is associated with Christianity, which was bizarre.
Wow. That is interesting. I love this. You know, Greg, we're almost out of time and we've actually gone a little over, which is fine because I definitely want to have you on again and we'll talk about that at some other point because I had no idea we were going to go here. That's what I love about the podcast. It's been inspiring for me, folks. I hope it's been for you. And also, Greg, what's the name of your next book?
It's going to be after a battle that which drove the Roman emperors to change over. Well, the end of Cleopatra, it leads to that. So it's a major naval battle in Greece. It's the next title.
That's great. That's great.
Bay.
Well, definitely when you get that out, we'll definitely have you on to talk about it. And then some other things as well, because I found you so much fun and highly entertaining. Folks, I hope you loved this as much as I did. I had a great time today. Greg, thanks for being on for us. Greg Ness. Folks, please remember to subscribe and also any notices you can put on. Love to have your input on how we're doing. But with that, I want to say thank you for joining us for another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. We'll see you next time. I'm Greg Stevens. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.